Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello friends, I hope that you've been well. In today's video, I am going to be focusing on drawing different expressions. So I came across this artist expressions challenge or expressions sheet, and I loved the idea of having a template challenge to work from that focused on expressions, since that isn't really something I have challenged myself with that much on my channel. And instead of using a single character to do all these various expressions, I am a person who loves variety, so I thought that it'd be fun to do multiple different characters of different fan arts. And I know that many of my followers like my 6 fan arts challenge illustrations, and so I hadn't done one in a while. This seemed like the perfect way to marry 2 concepts together. And so I also thought that it would be fun to have my patrons actually give me fan art suggestions, and if they so choose, they could also give me the expression that they wanted for that particular character or series. And for those of you who are already familiar with my channel, you'll know that anytime I do fan art of any sort, I am very chatty and I talk about the piece of media or the character that they come from, very podcasty. And I also will talk about tackling the different expressions as well as little tips and things on the drawing and coloring process as well. So just as a forewarning, if you are not familiar with me and don't like podcasts or when people inject chattiness that is outside of art specific in the process video, then this will not be for you. So you have been warned. And as always, all of the art supplies that I use in today's video will be listed in the description. So without further ado, let's get on to the video. So first up, we have Yor Forger from the anime/manga Spy Family. Fun fact, the characters are often pronouncing her name as Yoru, which actually translates to night in Japanese, which I think is very cute because her character is an assassin, so she often works in the nighttime. And then her male counterpart is a spy, and his code name is Twilight. So Twilight and Night, which I think is very, very cute. In any case, so as you can see, I am using my favorite red kohl erase pencil to do the sketching. And for those of you who are familiar with my process, you'll know that this is the pencil that I almost exclusively sketch with. And there are a number of reasons for that. And one of them being that I find that graphite pencils smudge and really don't mix well when you start coloring on top, whether it's paint or markers. I find that with red kohl erase pencils or any kind of red erasable pencil, especially for portraits, it just mixes a lot nicer. And so that's my preferred pencil of choice. And I don't film my sketching process very often because, as you'll see, even though this is sped up and edited, I do a lot of erasing, which is sort of frustrating to edit, but I also find that I get a little bit of performance anxiety when I'm filming and sketching, so it's just a lot easier for me not to film my sketching process. But as a special case here, I decided to film all of the sketching process for you for all these portraits. And something that I will note as well is I sketch very lightly because I know that I'm going to be erasing a lot, and that's why in the end my sketches look fairly clean because I sketch so lightly. And knowing that these portraits were going to be on the smaller side and I wanted them to keep them pretty simple, I knew that I wanted the line art to be more prominent in the art style. So I decided to go with various shades of gray for her hair, even though her hair is technically black in her character design. But I figured going with various shades of gray instead would allow for the eventual black line art to have higher contrast and stand out more when we get to that part of the process. So that's why I go for grays instead of a black, so that the line art stands out and hopefully creates a more punchy look to it. And in the spirit of this expressions challenge, like the sheet that I'm using as reference, and for the sake of experimenting, I decided to draw all these portraits without a neck or any shoulders. So they're just like these suspended heads floating. And it works really well when the character has short hair, but definitely a lot more challenging when the character has long hair like Yoru here. And I find that was something that just made the spread look a little strange, especially with this portrait, because she ended up scaling a little bit smaller because I was trying to account for her long hair. So it's one of those things where had this been digital, I definitely could have just easily scaled her to be a little larger to match the rest of the spread. But, you know, this is the hill I've decided to die on, which is using traditional media for most of my work. And so that's just one of those things where it's a very perfectionist, nitpicky thing, but that's something that really bothers me now that the spread is done, is that the scale of her is a little bit smaller than the rest. And I will say, even though I went into this portrait thinking the expression and the character would be really easy for me, or like in my comfort zone, she ended up being a portrait that I didn't really like the result of in the end, which is a bit of a bummer. But I will say that it's one of those things where just because you think you know how something's going to turn out, unfortunately, art making is a little bit unpredictable and things don't always go your way. But I will say that there were still takeaways that I enjoyed about doing this portrait, which is the way that I had made the hair strand further away from us to be a little bit lighter, and then the one that's closer to us a little bit darker. I think that's something that I really liked and I will move forward with in the future, or at least that's a takeaway that I have. But before we continue, I just want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. As a person who is primarily an artist of the internet, being able to easily update my website with my newest videos and my updated Instagram feed is so important, and I love that I can have it all in one place on one website, and it's so streamlined to use because you don't need to know anything about coding. And I've also been hosting my secret shop for my patrons where they can purchase previous rewards. And there was pretty much no learning curve. I was able to set up the shop and start using it right away with no hiccups. So if you're interested, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/imawonder for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And then moving on to the second portrait, which is Saka from Avatar: The Last Airbender. This ended up being one of my favorite portraits. And I think part of it is I was a little bit more warmed up after drawing Yoru. And I also scaled up the size of the portrait a little bit as well, which definitely I think makes it a lot easier to draw all of the features. And even though I have already drawn Saka a number of times before, he is my favorite character from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, so I couldn't resist drawing him. And my suggestion, from my patron, they actually had suggested Saka and Momo specifically from the scene where they drink the cactus juice, and that's why this is the expression that they chose, which I thought was so hilarious. And I did originally want to draw Momo as well, but because there was only 9 kind of slots that I could fit on this page, I didn't really want to take up 2 slots for Avatar: The Last Airbender. I wanted to try and get a wide variety of characters here, so in the end I decided not to include Momo, but I thought that was a very fun suggestion. And for those of you who are a fan of the series, you'll know exactly the scene I'm talking about. And yeah, it was like a perfect thing to have in the back of my mind when I was working on this expression. And something that I'm noticing with my versions of these expressions is that I definitely find that I end up going a little bit more subtle than the original kind of reference points, and I think that's fine. Like my style is not quite as exaggerated or animated, I guess, but I do think that this challenge was a good way to show that I could push these expressions a little bit further. And something that my brain just completely, I think I just had like a bit of a brain fart, but yeah, I ended up giving Saka brown eyes initially, which is incorrect. He has blue eyes, and I do fix that after I finally realized. So yeah, for those of you who are like, that's not right, I know, I fix it, don't worry. But yeah, I really love this paper for alcohol markers. When you see it all dry, it just looks so deliciously flat. Like the alcohol markers lay really, really nicely. And it is a bit of a challenge because the color, when it's initially laid down, it's different from what it dries to, which I'm sure you've seen throughout this process. And I've come to be a little bit used to it now, but I do know that some people are very confused by when they see the huge color difference. So I always recommend having somewhere to swatch your colors or have a swatch sheet ready to go so that you know exactly what color is going to end up appearing when you lay down the marker. Which, by the way, if you are interested in knowing more in-depth thoughts on this sketchbook, I do have a sketchbook review of this that I did a little while back, which I'll link in the description. But onto the actual expression here. So I typically find open mouth expressions to be much more challenging, but I think the fact that last month for my Patreon page, I did an entire spread of mouth/lip studies really helped me be able to tackle all of these open mouth expressions. And yeah, so here you can see I've realized, oh shoot, I made his eyes the wrong color. Initially tried with colored pencils, but it wasn't quite working. So I ended up using a Posca marker / an acrylic paint marker to fix the eye color issue, and it ended up working out really well. I'm really glad that ended up working out because I would have been really upset if I wasn't able to get his eye color right, because that is a pretty key part of his character design. And then here you can see I'm using a white paint marker to give the little highlights in the eyes a more starburst kind of shape to emulate the effects of the cactus juice. The third character here is quite an interesting one. This is Ray Sand from the book series A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I actually have only read the first half of the first book, and typically I don't tend to pick characters that I'm not very familiar with or feel any investment in when I take requests or suggestions. But I thought that this would be an interesting challenge because I'm not as familiar with this character, and it's a character that is from a novel. And so I don't actually have an official reference point visually. I mean, I did obviously Google around and looked at other people's interpretations of him and a description of him, but I thought it was going to be, just an interesting challenge and a good character to throw in the mix of the ones that I selected. So my impression of Ray Sand and the vibe that I had in mind when I was drawing him was he kind of reminds me of Damon Salvatore from the Vampire Diaries series. For those of you who are familiar with this character in the books, I'm would love to know if I am completely far off from that interpretation. But yeah, I have only read the first half of the first book, and he is technically in it in that first half, but he's initially a much more minor character. But yeah, gave me Damon vibes. He's like mischievous. He's kind of initially seen as like the villain, I suppose, kind of, right? I know, spoilers to a degree, that his character goes through quite the transformation, I suppose, throughout the series, and which kind of reminds me of Damon from The Vampire Diaries. But anyway, to reiterate what I was going for with Yor, I know that his hair is supposed to be black, but again, I wanted to mix up the colors here so that the black line art would stand out. So I ended up going for like a muted dark blue for his hair color, and it kind of leans slightly violet. I know that his eyes are supposed to be violet, but because of the suggested expression that was chosen for him, his eyes are meant to be closed. So that was my way of trying to make a nod to that. And yeah, this is not an expression that I would have expected for this character from what I know about him, but I think that this like cheeky, smug expression was definitely very fun to do, and I had a lot of fun drawing his like very chiseled face, which is again just me and my interpretation of this character. And there is something really satisfying about drawing those like really sharp jawlines and cheekbones. And yeah, despite not knowing this character very well, I ended up really liking how this portrait turned out. And yeah, I would love to know, for those of you who are ACOTAR fans, how I did on this portrait. And another thing that I noticed after doing the entire spread of characters here is that my art style kind of varies depending on the character and what piece of media that they come from. So you'll probably notice that with the first two, Yor and Saka, I kind of stuck to going for that simple, flatter look. But when it came to Raysand here, I ended up just going a little bit more rendered and spending a little bit more time like carving out the various shading in his face and the hair. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that I was sort of just going rogue, I suppose. I wasn't working from a reference that was specific to an anime or animated show. So that is something that I think is interesting about this spread, and I think good for you to see, for those of you who are often worried about a quote-unquote inconsistent art style. Just let it happen. Just go with it. Anyway, now we're moving on to the fourth character, which is Inuyasha from Inuyasha, the anime/manga. And Inuyasha is a character that I have drawn before. I actually used to do a obscene amount of fan art of Inuyasha and characters from that series back in high school. This is a series that has a very special place in my heart because it really sort of launched my love of anime to the umpteenth degree, I suppose. You can see here, so for the most part, I use a kneadable eraser, but I also have this kind of barrel fine tip eraser that I use as well. Not very often, but it felt appropriate for these sketches here. And it's good for getting more detailed areas when I only want to erase a specific area. And Inuyasha, the patron had not given me a specific expression that they wanted me to draw him with. So I decided to go with this kind of angry one since it felt very appropriate for his character. This is definitely an expression that we see him in very often. And it's also an expression that I personally don't draw very often, especially that like open mouth kind of angry emotion. And it was a great opportunity for me to challenge myself, but also to be able to draw his little fangs, which I think is a fun detail to add. And since my art style is sort of somewhere in between cartoon and realism, Inuyasha definitely is a challenging character for me because his character design is so unique. And especially with the suspended head thing, his hair was especially challenging to tackle since it's just a very odd character design when you really think about the logistics of it. And then also having to add in his little doggy ears. But yeah, I definitely took a lot of artistic liberties here. It's much more floofy in my interpretation than the shape language that is used in the original style. But I think kind of going for this floofier movement in his hair sort of reinforced the expression, I think, and gave it some movement. It felt kind of dynamic. So in the end, even though changing the hair slightly made him slightly less recognizable, I think that Inuyasha as a character has a very unique character design that I think people who are familiar with the series will be able to recognize him, hopefully. And yeah, I loved drawing his really angry, bold eyebrows, the little fangs. I also really love the eyes as well, because it's just very unique and really fun for me to do characters that are not entirely human. I will say though, white hair on a white backdrop is a challenge. And I wanted to make sure that his hair read as white and not gray, but I also wanted to give it dimension against this white background. And so I think what really helped was, you'll see I go in with a light purple and a light blue colored pencil to give the hair some more dimension and value. And again, to give it some color, because as you might know, I tend to favor going for a very colorful color palette. And so even though technically I could have just used various shades of gray, adding in the blue and the purple, I think, to the hair just makes it a little bit more interesting to look at as well visually. And by the way, for any of you who are Inuyasha fans, I did have a video where I did a screenshot redraw of Sesshomaru. It's a dedicated video where I just gush about Inuyasha, and I painted Sesshomaru using watercolors, so I'll have that linked in the description. And the patron who had requested Inuyasha actually had also suggested Koga, but since I'd already drawn him before in a 6 fan arts video, that's why I went with Inuyasha, so I'll have that video linked as well. And moving on to the next character here, we have Rukia Kuchiki from Bleach. Similar to Inuyasha, Bleach is a series that I was obsessed with in high school, and I am so happy about the return of Bleach with the final season. And Rukia is also a character that I had drawn many times before. Originally, I actually had tried to draw her by memory, but you'll see that I ended up having to completely erase her and draw her again because the hair wasn't quite right. And technically she does have a couple of different hair styles, I guess, in the series. I decided to go with the slightly shorter hair since I think that's the hair that she has in the most recent season. And Rukia, similar to the other two characters that have black hair, I decided to go with a purple undertone for her hair since she has purple eyes. And again, just to go with something that isn't just a pure black for her hair. And something that I decided to experiment as well with is the way that I rendered the hair. In the previous versions, I was using like an upwards stroke motion for the hair and then having it fade into the middle for the highlight. But for Rukia, I decided to approach it almost like metal, essentially, or something very, very shiny. And this is a style that I think I've approached before, and I sort of did a little bit with a previous illustration with watercolors. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's really, really fun, and I think it translates really well, especially for anime characters. It's just like a very interesting style and makes the shape of the hair really pop. And so even though it's not very realistic, it's just very visually interesting to me. And as someone who isn't really going for perfect realism anyways, it's fun to experiment and push the type of kind of look and textures for various things. And for the expression, the patron who had suggested or requested Rukia did give me a suggestion of this expression. And initially, this was an expression that I wouldn't normally associate with Rukia, but then it reminded me of, especially in the earlier seasons of the show or like the lighthearted episodes, she would have a, excited expression about cutesy bunny merch and like things like that. So it was fun to explore this side of her personality that we don't get to see as often, and it's very fun to interpret or go with something that I wouldn't normally think of for this character. I will say though, something that did end up happening, unfortunately, is that I got the volume of her hair wrong after rendering it. The kind of bottom part is a lot floofier than I think is meant to be for her actual character design. So you'll see in the side here, I tried to fix it a little bit with a white paint marker. It didn't quite work out perfectly, but in any case, overall, I think the eyes on Rukia turned out really cute. And then moving on to the next character, we have Mel from Arcane. This was a suggestion that I was really excited about because I absolutely loved Arcane. It is a Netflix animated series that is based off of the video game League of Legends. And I had been wanting to do more fan art for this series, and I actually have been wanting to draw Mel specifically for a while. So this ended up coming at the perfect time. And I wasn't given an expression for this one, so I decided to go with this one where she is kind of annoyed, because I think this is definitely an expression that I could picture this character having. And it's always a challenge to pick expressions where the eyes are different. Like one eye is, kind of open with the eyebrow raise and the other is squinting. And so that's definitely a challenge, especially for a character that is also extremely beautiful. So you want to strike a balance of getting the expression across, but also having it still be flattering so that the character is still attractive. And Mel, as you would see, is a very beautiful character. So I wanted to make sure that I captured her beauty as best as I could. But yes, with that being said, I initially was feeling really nervous about the outcome of this portrait because initially I wasn't feeling very confident with the expression, but also making it look flattering for her. But in the end, this portrait ended up being one of my favorites for a number of reasons. And one of them is the beauty of using colored pencils on top of mid to dark skin tones. I love using lighter tones on top of darker marker bases. And so if you've seen the show or when you look at screenshot grabs from the series, they often give Mel a cool tone highlight on her skin tone, which is not something that I typically would go for or think of. But I decided to take that risk and use a blue for the highlights of her skin. And I'm really glad that I did it because it just creates such an interesting contrast on her skin tone. And I think that it ended up working out despite my nervousness or my hesitation with it. And another benefit of the acrylic paint markers is I was able to fix her eye a little bit here where the marker had bled or had gone a little bit astray. And something that I will say about these alcohol markers on this paper, for the most part, I really enjoy it, but there are some cases where it feathers a little bit, and that happened with the lips. I feel like my initial sketch, the mouth expression was a little bit more exaggerated. It was like a little bit more open, but the markers ended up kind of bleeding a little bit, and then it ended up making the lips a little bit more closed. Not a big deal, but it's just something that I've noticed throughout the process of working on this. And then similar to the skin tone, I had so much fun adding the colored pencil on top of the hair to give it dimension, but also give it that texture as well. And her hair is like a dark brown, but to kind of bring the purples that I added to her eyeshadow and bring it together, I used a dark violet for the hair instead of a black or a dark brown. And I really like how she turned out. Next, we have the only live action character, which is Jobu Tupaki from the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. The patron had not given me a character specifically, they just had suggested any character from this film, and I finally got around to watching this movie a few days ago, and it is incredible. It definitely lived up to the hype. I'd heard so many good things about it, and I loved it, and I ugly cried, and it was incredible. So I had to oblige to this request. And I had, a dilemma about which character to draw because there are so many great characters in this film. And I ended up going with Jobu Tupaki because I don't have any villains on this spread. Well, Ray Sand is not really a villain, but he kind of has slight villain era vibes when in the part of the book that I had read. Anyway, and I also just, she has so many great looks as this character, or as the villain, I suppose, in the film. I know that this look that I ended up going for, that she has towards the end, is maybe not the look that is most associated with this character, but I could not resist this gothic magical girl villain look. I am obsessed. For those of you who are familiar with my aesthetic and what I'm interested in, you'll probably not be entirely surprised that I picked this look. I'm obsessed with the hair. I love the little hearts on her cheeks. It just feels like a character design that I would have made up myself. So I, of course, had to do it. And this was an expression that was actually quite hard to capture while also trying to create a stylized version of this real person. I initially wanted to keep in mind of the actress's likeness, but I definitely don't think that came through at all, which is not a big deal because the main focal point for this video and this illustration was the character design and the expression, and I wasn't overly concerned about capturing the actress's likeness because that wasn't really the point of today's video. And in the end, I am really happy with how the hair turned out. I decided to keep going with this aesthetic of making the hair be shiny like metal. And as I was working on this, she kind of reminded me of like a villain that you would see in Inuyasha, or even maybe like a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure character design. I've only seen a couple of episodes of that series, but there's something about this character design that reminds me of that. Or maybe like the evil sister of Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that whoever had devised this character design choice for Jobu must have had some kind of anime influence, because it really hits all of my character design aesthetic checkpoints, I suppose. And what's interesting is that even though I was using reference photos of a real person, I ended up being able to dial back and keep the portrait fairly stylized, and I think that if you were to just look at this spread and not be familiar with any of the characters, I don't think you'd necessarily be able to pinpoint that she was being referenced to a real person or a live action character. And I think that just comes down to it coming naturally to me and being less focused on trying to make it look exactly like the actress, and thus I was more focused on just capturing the design of the character as opposed to the realism of the actress's face. So again, when people ask me about how I translate real people versus really cartoon characters into my own style, a lot of it really just comes down to it being a natural flow of it happening. Which leads us to our second last portrait here, which is Tamaki from the anime/manga Ouran High School Host Club. I definitely went it a little bit more animated, more expressive and exaggerated for this expression. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that this is a character who is already extremely animated and goofy and silly, and the energy that this character has really suited this expression. For the patron who had suggested this, I love that you picked this character and this expression to go with it. He is a character that is extremely melodramatic. He's quite the drama queen, and he for sure has had this expression throughout the run of the series. And this is a character that I have drawn before on my channel and that I used to draw often in my high school days. Ouran High School Host Club is another one of those anime series that I have a very, very strong fondness for and loved in high school. So even though I've already drawn him before, I had to do it again because I love him so much. He's actually my favorite character from the series. And I had so much fun with this expression. It's so over the top for me. I love drawing like sad, pouty expressions, but I usually don't go quite this ham. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. And I also made the colors really, really punchy. Normally with blonde hair, I usually go for something a little bit more natural looking, but it felt appropriate for his character to just go ahead and aim for that like really bright yellow. That is what his character design is, and because the expression that I drew here was so over the top to begin with, just leaning into the cartoonish element of it, of the colors, ended up, I think, working out really well. Something that was interesting about trying to draw him here was the jawline. I'm still not really sure if I am pleased with this choice, but as you might know, a lot of anime styles, the jawlines are much more pointed, the chin, and his character design for sure has that just like very classic pointed chin. But I felt like for me, I wanted to, of course, incorporate my own style into it. And because this is a male character, I wanted to just interpret the jawline the way that I normally would with a male character. So I did give him like a slightly more square, angular jawline. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it in the end, but overall, I think that the expression was the key, and I do think that ended up being executed successfully. I remembered in a previous live stream, we had been discussing about that they should bring back or extend Ouran High School Host Club because it's such a beloved anime, and there was such a missed opportunity with how much of the story we didn't get to see from the manga translated into the anime. And I feel like with the return of Fruits Baskets, I feel like Ouran High School Host Club should get that treatment because I love this series and I feel like there's still a huge audience that would love to see it come back. So low-key, we need a petition for Ouran High School Host Club to come back as an anime. And yeah, as you can see, I also use the kneadable eraser to pick up some of the colored pencil as well if I feel like I went a little bit too dark in certain areas. So I did that for the kind of jawline around his face there. But yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how this one turned out, actually. I have like mixed feelings about that jawline, but other than that, I think he turned out pretty cute. And then the last portrait here, we have Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan. So this is an interesting one because for some reason, when the patron had suggested Eren Yeager, for some reason, my brain just forgot that Eren is this character and not Levi. I think for whatever reason, maybe hopeful thinking, I thought they had suggested Levi. And so when I finally went to actually draw this portrait and I was like, you know, Googling the character so that I have a reference point, I was like, oh wait, this is Eren. This is Eren and not Levi, who I originally thought in my brain was who I was going to be drawing. Anyway, so I am a newer fan to Attack on Titan, and I actually have only seen the first 3 seasons so far. But I am someone who's on the internet a lot, and I have not been able to escape the fact that the Eren that I knew or know or am familiar with in the series is very different now, and I have not been able to escape this new look that he has, this like half man bun situation going on. So I decided to draw him in this time jump character design. I don't think it's a major spoiler. I will say though, I have been marginally spoiled about the fact that his character goes through quite the change, I think. I don't want to give anything away, and I also don't even know entirely what's going on with his character. But in any case, I will say I was extremely surprised to see the suggested expression to go along with Eren, because from what I can tell, I don't think I've ever seen him with this sort of smug smirk ever in my memory. Again, I'm not fully caught up, so I could be wrong. So I had quite the challenge trying to get Eren to look like himself with this expression. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not entirely sure what happened here. He ended up looking like a character from Young Justice or Teen Titans or something. I don't really know what it is about what happened here. Like, not only the expression, but like the style that ended up happening for this as well. Again, I have no idea how this happened. He just feels so out of place for me in this lineup in terms of the style and the execution. I also think that maybe because it was the last portrait on this spread, I was sort of in a rush and I was kind of like just wanting to get this finished. So I probably also didn't spend as much time on him either. But in any case, this is the final result. And apologies to all of the Eren fans and to the patron who had suggested him, because I really did not do him justice whatsoever. I will have to draw him again and redeem myself here.
And that concludes today's video. I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you so much to my patrons for supporting me on that platform and for also giving me some really great character suggestions. I wasn't able to get through all of them, so I actually am going to be doing a part 2 of this video series with a completely different set of characters and expressions, so look forward to that. And obviously no pressure to join my Patreon page. I just like to give them extra love because they really do allow me to be a full-time artist, and I can never thank them enough. So I will also say thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comments which character was your favorite. And with that, I hope that you have an amazing day or evening wherever you're at, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!